When I walk into a bank, for example, nowadays, and this is just based on my experience, it's like a whole different experience. It's more like hey man, how can I make this happen? Like, how can I do this? I'm not walking in there like bombastic, like a jerk, like demanding, like, give me this, give me that. No, I treat people the way I want to be treated. How do I raise this 200K business lines of credit? How do I do this? How do I do that? Okay, well, you need to have 800K in gross income for that year. Well, I can put that together. And once you get that checklist, man, you walk in there demanding your financing and you're going to get it.
Welcome to the Physicians and Properties Podcast, the show where we teach you how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want.
Doctor! 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 Doctor!
Now, here's your host, Dr. Alex Schloe.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Physicians and Properties Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Alex Schloe, and I'm grateful for you taking the time to listen to this episode. Today's podcast was very unique, something that I have not heard about. I will give two caveats. The first is there's a little bit more profanity in this episode. So if your kids are in the car, maybe you listen to this at a time when they're not around. The other is our guest today talks about a very unique strategy and ways that you can purchase real estate using business lines of credit. Okay. Do your due diligence on this. This is not financial advice. This is a very unique strategy that may work for you, but you definitely want to make sure you're partnering with and you're understanding the risk of this strategy. So without any further ado, let's get started with today's episode with Dr. Benjamin Maciel. He graduated from Caribbean Medical School in 2024 and decided to do real estate full-time instead of pursuing residency. He owns 31 total units in Portland, Oregon, and started by buying properties with credit cards and cash advances. So again, really unique strategy. And it was really cool to hear his journey, first buying a property management company when he was 22, realizing, hey, there's got to be something more to this, exiting that business, and then going into medical school. And then realizing, hey, maybe this isn't for me. I really love the real estate. I really love the business aspect. I've really figured out this unique strategy that's working, and going from there and deciding to grow and scale that. So like I said, this episode, a little bit extra profanity, more unique. So make sure you're doing your due diligence, but a really cool strategy and a really cool podcast episode with Dr. Benjamin Maciel. Dr. Benjamin Maciel, welcome to the Physicians and Properties Podcast. So glad to have you on the podcast. Thanks for your time, man. How are things going?
It's going great. It was a very warm welcome. I really appreciated it. It was awesome. Nice little dry run there. And yeah, man, I'm happy to be here. I love being around like-minded people, physicians who want to make some money in real estate, and also share the journey though too, and give a little bit back, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a great conversation before the podcast. Folks, we talked for like 10 or 15 minutes and realized we weren't recording. So Benjamin brought some fire, and unfortunately none of it was recorded. So we'll do our best here right now. Benjamin, awesome, man. Do you mind telling folks a little bit about yourself and your journey?
Yeah, so I'll pretty much start it off after college. You know, after chasing dreams, I wanted to be a big football player, but realized that number one, I wasn't 6'5" and I didn't run a 440, you know. And so that wasn't going to work for me. And so I kind of pivoted. I kind of went the social media route, like, hey, I'm going to go get a social media marketing job. This was 2014, I think. And so the first job that I landed doing social media type of stuff was basically working in Missouri at a property management business. And so I started out working at that property management business. Here's my daddy, just dropped off rent checks. That's always nice.
That's awesome. Yeah,
I'm really in real estate, I promise. Tenants paying rent at 8:00 at night. You know, that's awesome. What you do. You get it whenever you can get it. And yeah, that was funny. And so I started off with property management business. You know, I had no idea what I was doing. I just remember showing up there on an early Sunday morning, and the lady interviewing me, and the lady was about 60 years old at the time, and her daughter was not interested in the business, and so I was like boy wonder, the son that she never had, coming to the rescue in a sense. And so I just showed up there. She found out that I knew about construction and building and building construction because my dad's a builder. And it was like, I started out as an intern. Then I started out as a leasing agent. And then they found out that I had a construction experience. And then I started managing the handyman, and doing the turnovers and stuff like that. And before I knew it, she just came in. I'll never forget it. On a Tuesday and was like, hey, I want you to buy my business. It was like, I don't have any money. I don't have any this. I don't have any that. And she's like, don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. But at that time, I kind of had already introduced her to I call him like my mentor, business partner, friend. And so she knew that I can somehow put together the money, and that's how that started. And then before I knew it, I was in the property management business, but I don't consider that necessarily the real estate business because you're there focusing on the business, and it took at least 2 or 3 years for me to even understand how to run a business in the first place. So I was 22, 23 years old, but the office manager that had been there for 10 years was 62.
Yeah. I bet that was an interesting dynamic for you.
Yeah, it was an interesting dynamic for me for sure. When we were working together, it was more like an auntie-nephew relationship, and then over time, it was more of like a employee to employee, more professional, boss to this. And so I missed those days with that person, especially because we're still friends now, where it was like, hey, auntie, nephew, that kind of thing. But then we ended up getting into a lawsuit, which was very interesting. And so then all of a sudden your auntie's there on the stand, like testifying against you and like, facts and stuff like that. And so that was kind of like a thickening the skin type of situation on the entrepreneurial journey, and it was like, hey, okay, at the end of the day, this is a business. These are employees, in this aspect, you kind of have to separate it. Like, yeah, she's your auntie. You really appreciate her when you guys were working and first getting started, you appreciate that relationship. But then once it comes to the business corporation level, it's like a completely different relationship, and it just makes you respect the game, if that makes sense. Like, okay, I respect the game a little bit more. And now thinking back about it, it was like, okay, she had a job to do. It was her job. She stayed there in the business when I had already exited, And so it was like, of course, she's going to, get on the stand and do this and do that. It's her job, And so once I exited that business, I had ran it for 3 or 4 years. We built it up from doing $300K in revenue to then doubling revenue, 600,000-700,000. But for a property management business, that's pretty big.
Yeah, it's huge.
The margins on property management businesses are great. And so I was talking to a friend the other day, I actually met him through Instagram, and he wants to talk about investing in the Midwest and investing out of state. And I told him, I said, if you want to do that, it's my opinion, I would first and foremost look around for a property management business to purchase first. And then I would go out and start looking at property and projects, et cetera, And so, yeah, that was my experience in terms of my first access to real estate. And at that time, I bought a fourplex. Then I bought a duplex. My fourplex got robbed. And so literally that neck, I kid you not, I still can't explain it to this day how I pulled that thing off. My fourplex got robbed. That night, I had already put together a lease option deal, my first lease option deal. And I didn't even know it was actually called a lease option. All I said was, hey, I don't have the money now, but in 6 months, I swear I'm going to buy this property from you. And right now, though, from right now, this 6 months to the next 6 months, I'm going to pay you $675 a month, but just take the $675 off the sales price. And dude, it was like on a 1-page letter of intent type of deal, probably couldn't even enforce it. And yeah, man, I pulled it off. And so I got us out of that little fourplex that we got broken into. And so I ran the business, long story short, and I wasn't really diving deep into real estate though. Now, once I got the business up and running, my last year, that's when I started listening to this podcast. And you guys can listen to him. He's great. He's awesome. His name's Vincent Polisi. So you guys can look into him. But he started teaching me like through the books, and I met him on Facebook and all that kind of stuff, phone calls, bought his stuff. But he started teaching me about like creative financing and why you never want to have equity in properties and lawsuits and bankruptcy laws and all I would say I don't want to say the dark side of real estate, but like the third and fourth level of real estate, like, hey, instead of buying 1 property a year, why don't you buy 10? And this is how you do it. This is how you set it up. And so when I was that last year of living in the Midwest, that's when I went from like 2 or 3 properties to then owning or controlling, which is a big thing that people don't know. You don't have to own a property. You can control properties. So I went from owning probably 2 or 3 properties to then controlling like almost 20 units. Yeah, which is really funny because somewhere in like divorce paperwork, I'm going through divorce right now, the attorney somewhere somehow found out a paper from like 6 or 7 years ago And they're like, you own these properties and you lied to us in court and all this kind of stuff. And it was like, listen, I didn't own the properties and you have no room to explain, if that makes sense. And so it's like, I didn't own them at the time. I controlled them. I did a lease off. You want to say all this stuff, but you can't like explain in great detail, if that makes sense. So anyway, after that last year, I was getting ready to exit the business. And it was like, let me look around for things that I'm very interested in, very interested in. Like I was 26, 27 at the time. I think I was 26 at that time. And it was like, let me try this. Let me try that. Let me try this. But it was like, man, that kind of seems like kind of low. Like if I'm going to do it, I want to do it big. I want to do something bigger. And so my wife at the time, she basically was like, hey, why don't you try and be an anesthesiologist? I think you'd make a good anesthesiologist. And so eventually I ended up going to Shadow. And on the first day, I saw them administer anesthesia. And then I saw the patient interaction, and I was hooked. And I was like, okay, how the heck do I do this? I was already locked in on it. And then I remember running payroll for my small business, right? And, in payroll, it's like, hey, if you're paying $25 an hour, you have to bill out at least 50, to make margins and that kind of thing. And so I remember leaving my office for that morning and then walking into this hospital that all of a sudden had a big ass cafeteria, that all of a sudden had all of these employees and all of this massive extra stuff. And I'm like, oh, there's money here for sure. Like this is a whole new game. This is a whole new area. Property management business it's good margins, but it isn't lucrative in a small town, in a small place, in a small area. The real estate is where you make the most money on. And so, yeah, that was pretty much how I got to the point where I decided in medicine.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. What a cool and crazy journey, but that's awesome. Yeah, property management, that's a tough business to be in. You got your hands dirty and you learned a lot, I'm sure. And it probably honestly helped you in med school too, be able to translate some of those skills, managing people, dealing with difficult folks, those sorts of things. I'm sure it was really helpful for you in med school as well. And probably some stressful times that prepared you for the stress of med school. So that's awesome.
These last 10 years, I would say from the point where I was 22 or 23, my whole life has been high performance, high stress, just buying a business right away, then going into medical school. And then, now it's always been that. And so people are like, well, you never stop. Your mind is always going, because I've mentally trained. I've put myself in situations where it was like, you got to do this or else,
right.
And at the time it was like, hey, I owed people, $300,000-$400,000. And so it was like, that was like the I want to say like that gun to your head type of moment, like where you better perform, because I always want to pay my debts. I don't want to put myself in a position ever, whether it's a bank, contract, or anybody, where somebody's coming to my house and knocking on my door saying that I owe them money in a sense, know? And so basically the hard part about medical school, the hardest part was going from 7, 8 employees, 15 employees at a time, that kind of thing. Being able to walk in a room, delegate, hey, do this, do that, do this, do that, do this, do that. To then all of a sudden, you're in there in a room in a 1-bedroom apartment in the Caribbean, which I went to Caribbean medical school. I chose Caribbean medical school because I remember calling up Portland Community College, because by that time we had moved to Portland Community College, or Portland. And I was like, hey, what do I got to do to be in medical school? They were like 3 years of undergrad or 3 years of prerequisites. You may get in the first round. I was like, well, that's not going to happen, And so anyway, I just remember Googling away and I found this girl on YouTube. Her name's Medumentary, right? Blonde girl, little tiny thing. And I just watched her journey. And then I saw the point where she was getting into residency, and I just focused on one person. If that person could do it, I could do it. Like I went on Reddit at that point, looked at all the horror stories. I looked at all these, different people, and I just didn't pay attention to them. Honestly, I was like, hey, if one person can do it, I know I can do it. And so that was really my mindset. And so I chose Caribbean because I didn't have to wait 3 or 4 years. And then from there, it was like the costs were just ridiculously cheaper.
Yeah, that's way awesome. Where were you in the Caribbean? What school did you go to?
I was at St. Vincent in the Grenadines.
How did you study with those views?
Oh, so let me tell you this. This was the funny part. So I get to the Caribbean, right? And I move and I go to this apartment, and it's up at the top of a hill. And I'm like, hey, cool. This is awesome. It doesn't have a view, but it was like $500 a month. You know what I mean? And it was a house, but the way older people retire in the Caribbean specifically is they'll go up into the mountains and they'll build like a 3 or 4 story structure, right? That's basically all cement, but it'll be skeleton, but all the way at the top, the top level will be finished and done, and they'll live in that apartment. And then as they grow older, they'll just build down, right? And so my apartment was like on the 3rd or 4th level up against a hill. And I was there maybe a week that time, right? And so all of a sudden, he's like, oh, we're going to do an addition on this side. No big deal, you know? And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I got to study, you know? By then, they had already given my first like set of coursework. And I had no background in anatomy, physiology, science, nothing. I legit showed up there with a pad and a pen and a laptop, right? Like legit, nothing. And then all of a sudden I'm learning anatomy and physiology, taking 21, 22 units, right? I told you, man, high stress. So I go and I'm sitting there in my apartment and the guy goes, hey, we're going to start construction right here. We're building a new unit. And I was like, no, you know, I got to work and I got to study all this stuff. And then he's like, oh, no big deal. We're just going to come and put plastic all over all of your stuff. And the guy was actually going to take down my whole wall on my apartment. And he was expecting me to stay there. So I was like, dude, no, like, no way. And at that time, I hadn't given him my deposit yet because I was trying to convert it into Caribbean dollars, you know? And so I was like, hey, man, I'm going to leave. I'm going to go find another place. And then I found a place with a friend, beachfront apartment. I'll make a post on Instagram here in a little while for you guys so you guys can actually go back and see the view. But beachfront apartment, $500, all utilities included. And it was just awesome. But to answer your question, how I studied there with the view, that was pretty much when I started learning how my test strategies were and how I learned. And I learned through drawing things out. I can't tell you guys his name, but when I was in the Caribbean, I was not focused on Caribbean medical students because a lot of us, you know, we didn't make it obviously. And I knew that in general, but I was focused on people that were going to Harvard, you know, Mount Sinai. Like I was focused on people that were out of the US. And so I would watch their vlogs. That was like when vlogging first came out, you know, I think it was like 2020, 2021, where a lot of people were at home and they were just doing a lot of vlogging. And so I just remember Dr. Grid, something GR, big long Indian name from Harvard. And so I started watching and learning how he learned. And I was just drawing out the system. I was drawing out pathways. I was drawing things out to just draw them. And it just registered, you know, it just really, really clicked. And so I just found out my test strategy, but also I learned that basically if I wake up at 3:45 in the morning, from 3:45 to like 7 or 8, that's my peak time. That's like the time when mentally I am just on it, you know, and there's no distractions. And so to answer your question, that's really how I was able to do it, just studying really stupid early and ignoring a lot of the extra stuff. Now the weekends were fun. The weekends were a lot of fun, you know. You would take a catamaran and you'd go to Beckway, or you would do, you know, there was always things to do. And then you start making some friendships with locals, et cetera. So there's always some fun stuff to do. But, you know, you got to stay focused at the same time.
That's awesome, man. How did med school go for you? How was that process, and how was the real estate business and so forth while you were there?
Yeah, so let me tell you this. So I was over there on the island, and then COVID happened, right? Now, when I was in medical school, I started getting buff and in shape again. And so what ended up happening was I tore my rotator cuff, the part of my rotator cuff that attaches to my pec. And so I had to be back in surgery. So I flew back home to be with my wife in surgery. And literally 2 weeks later, that's when they shut everything down for COVID.
Yeah, that was.
And so I like to, yeah, it was. And I feel like I had 2 medical school experiences when it came to medical school. I had the first like traditional, being a medical student, living in the Caribbean, flying back every couple of months to, you know, visit my wife at the time and all that kind of stuff. And then the COVID time where I was just sitting there in the lab, and on a flight, I kid you not, on a flight from the Caribbean to Portland, I had a layover in Toronto, Canada. And my friend at the time, he said, and his name was Tamid, and I love him still to this day. He invited me up to his lounge. You know, I say his lounge, but it was a lounge that you get because you had a certain credit card, right? I think it's like the Capitol Lounge or something like that. And so kind of like anything, I just got super hooked on it. I said, wait, what? Just because you have a credit card, you get this, you know, like showers, food, benches, you know, things that you could sleep, massage chairs. And I was like, what the hell is this? Let me geek out on this, because the way I was always was like, hey, we're going to do things with debit cards, no credit cards. You know, you maybe have a credit card. My wife at the time, she was the one with the credit cards and all that stuff. I never believed in credit cards, all that kind of thing. And so I just went down the rabbit hole, man. And it started out with credit cards, credit rewards. And then all of a sudden I saw one video that was like, hey, use credit cards to buy real estate. And I was like, this is the answer to all my problems, you know? And it was like, what do you mean? I can literally take a bunch of credit cards and I can go out and buy a bunch of real estate, you know? And so I had my LLC, I had my wife's W-2 income as a nurse, right? And now I knew how to raise a bunch of business credit. It was like the perfect storm. And then COVID, where I was just sitting there at home all day studying, like that's like the perfect, like the perfect environment to just go out and build some shit, you know?
Your risk tolerance is way higher than mine.
Dude, I'm telling you, once you go through one process where like literally you have, you know, like I said, like when I first bought my first business at 22 years old, I was sitting at $400K in debt that I owed to individuals, not institutions. Owing money to individuals is a lot more stressful than owing money to institutions. I learned that, you know, when I'm on a property and let's say it was to go bad, I want to make sure all the contractors get paid before the lender gets paid, because they're in the business of lending. They understand that risk. When this person signs up to take on my job, you know, that's for his family. He's not in the business of collecting money. He's in the business of, you know, providing a service. And so because I owed individuals at that time, that's a whole nother level of stress.
It's a good way to look at it. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so it's like, okay, what do you mean? I'm going to take out this $20,000 credit card, use it as a down payment on a 3.5% FHA loan or a 5% down FHA loan that we're buying in my wife's name, or things like that nature, you know, like what I realized too, and this is in Vincent Polisi's podcast. And I think I mentioned that when we were first talking, or maybe I mentioned it now.
Yeah. You mentioned it now. Yep.
Yeah. So Vincent Polisi, you know, a lot of his, you know, the structuring and things like that in real estate. And then later on, I connected with Sharif Medawar. You can look him up, Sharif Medawar. He's great too. He's the one that I actually learned a lot from and did consulting calls with during a time when the recession was going from, you know, 11, 12% interest rates up, right, on hard money. And basically between those two guys, it was like, man, risk is just a part of the business.
Yeah, it sure is.
Know, risk is just a part of the business. And so if you reach the level of desperation enough mentally, you know, you're going to be like, and I said, I tell people this, like, I was at the point where I was mentally desperate because I wanted so badly to get ahead of my situation, because I wanted my wife to be able to have kids. I wanted to get out of 1-bedroom, 1-bath apartment. I wanted to be 4 different people or 5 different people at one time. I wanted to be a medical student making doctor money, and that was doing medical school different than everybody else. You know, I always wanted to do it different, a little bit different than everybody else. And so that was really the solution, and my creative outlet was to raise a bunch of money with business credit and then use it to buy real estate to improve our lives. And I got to tell you, that first transaction, it was the first transaction that I did with business credit, right? And I was at a divorce like deposition, you know, where they put you in like a deposition, and it's basically like a game of gotcha, right? Like where they're trying to play gotcha, do this, do that, what's this, explain this, do that, you know. And then I realized, like, man, this is all like an act. Like it's like an act, you know. The legal system is kind of like a game. Nobody's going to put a gun to your head in a sense. So anyway, I'm sitting there, and in this moment, they give me the settlements. Still right now, I can tear up on command. Legit, I can tear up on command looking at that settlement statement, because it was like they put the settlement statement in front of me, and you see the transactions, 15,000, 21,000, 12,000. And each one of those transactions represents like 3 or 4 months of planning and work that I had done before that. Sleepless nights, waiting for that money to hit, you know, waiting for that money to hit. And then once it actually hit, you know, from the balance transfers to the hard money lender account, etc. And then once that transaction hit, within that next week, seeing my parents come and look at the property, they were like, holy shit, you bought this? You know, like you bought this fourplex. It's almost $800,000. You bought this? And then seeing my wife come through with our brand new, I bought a Dodge Ram Limited and business credit, because then I started finding out about business credit and all that stuff. So we were driving like a brand new Dodge Ram. And that morning I was studying too. I woke up super early to study. And then in the afternoon, I went over there. Dude, it was like I can't explain it other than it was like a dream, And I just remember pulling my daughter out, my daughter at the time, we just had a daughter. And it was like a surreal moment, It was like, holy shit, all of this because I just went out and raised a bunch of money.
Yeah, that's wild.
With credit cards during medical school,
yeah.
While I'm becoming a doctor.
Yeah, and a dad.
I was like,
a new dad. Yeah.
And a new dad. Well, that was a lot of the stress relief too, making babies.
What was next for you after that first deal?
So after that first deal, I just started piling them on. I just got on the roller coaster. That was a time when interest rates were like, 3 or 4? And so in that span, I think we bought 8 or 9 properties totaling 30, 31 units. And then obviously with the interest rates slowing us down, right? When the interest rates started kicking up and slowing us down, that's when everything was like, whoop. I just stopped cold turkey. But the thing that really screwed us was not only the interest rates going up, right? But also then my wife went down to part-time. So a lot of our loose unsecured debt, well, I had to put together a roller coaster, like a train, so to speak, of balance transfers, because then at that point, on paper, you're making $12,000 a month or $10,000 a month to now working part-time, you're only making $6,000. Well, then it messes up your debt to income ratio. So then I'm sitting there as a man looking at my wife and being like, well, I'm not going to make you go back to working full-time. Like, how are you going to do that? Yeah. And by that time, I already had my son, Ezra. And so it was like, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to figure out a plan to get us a bridge, right? And my bridge was like, hey, survive to 25. That was in my mind. I saw that online where some guy said, survive to 95. And in my mind, I copied that. And I was like, hey, if I can just survive to 25, I'll be out of medical school, right? I'll be ready to rock and roll towards the end of June. June 2024 is when I finished medical school. And so mentally, I was like, as soon as June comes, I'm going to get back on the train again. I'm going to go start flipping. I'm going to go start raising money, start a consulting business, do more of the social media consulting type of stuff at that point, and which then, the divorce and all that stuff started. But that was really the transition was, I would say, interest rates rising and then not being able to refinance a lot of the unsecured debt. So now we're at a spot where we're pretty much holding a lot of, and I'm being very vulnerable. I'm not here to hide details or information from anybody. But now we're at a point where we're carrying this debt and basically a lot of the rental income now is going to servicing that debt. And so all we have to do now is get to the point where we can like move around debt, refinance, rebuild in a sense. And it kind of goes in those waves, right? But now it's at the point where like, I know the game. So now it's like, it's only a matter of me of being free, getting back on the bike, so to speak, and just turning on the engines. And I'm like, okay, I can move this, do that, bounce here, bounce there, create these types of transactions. But in terms of real estate, I just can't think of any other business, man, where you're just sitting there from your phone and you put together a team. And I wanted to really help a lot of new people. So I put together some notes here this afternoon about different positions, like a different game plan, how to go from being a busy medical student to then all of a sudden being able to buy properties during residencies as you're moving around rotations.
Yeah, that'd be really helpful. I wanted to hit one thing real quick before you did that. So graduated med school in 24. Was there any thought to like, hey, I'm going to go to residency now? Or were you just like, hey, I see the light in real estate. I'm loving this. Let me just get after it from a real estate perspective.
Honestly, no. I was in a counseling session the other day or whatever it was. And then one guy said that he quietly quit. And it just kind of stuck with me, where it's like, whoa, what do you mean quietly quit, And so mentally at that point, both the problems in my marriage, I would say more so, made me quietly quit, where it was like, okay, if I keep growing in real estate, like basically I'm going to lose half of it anyway. So it kind of got that like spiral where it was like, hey, I was super embarrassed, but the motivation and the inspiration that got me to this level, which primarily came from my wife and my family, that family dynamic, where it kind of just like leveled out, and I was like out of that Eden moment, I call it my coming out of the Garden of Eden moment, where it was like, oh shit, this is the world. Like this is a new reality for me, And so I just kind of quietly quit the real estate business and I just kind of coasted by, so to speak. But I mentally just shut down in terms of real estate and medicine. I just remember sitting there for studying for step 2-3 nights before it. And I was already checked out. Like I was not in the game. You know what I mean? And it was because and I hate to say this honestly, and a lot of people you may watch this and you're like, man, This guy's living in an alternate reality, kind of appears to be delusional. But when you're on the phone one day, and I shit you not, this is a situation. When you're on the phone one day and you walk into the bank with your checklist and you know that you have every single T dotted and every single and you know without a shadow of a doubt that you're just going to raise $100,000, the $100,000 that you need to go invest in a property, your life ain't going to be the same anymore after that.
Fair.
You're not going to be the same after that. Money is like this rent check is great. It's cool, but I'm going to take this, whatever, $1,000, for example, from this tenant, and I'm going to try and rack up $300,000 of debt against it somehow, some way.
Yeah. I was gonna say how. Tell us how.
Well, the banks are lending institutions, so we can go on that because a lot of people are going to ask how. Basically, what I've learned is that banks market for a reason because they want to make loans, and the younger the banker, the wetter your beak should get because they're more hungrier. They're more on it. They want to make the sale. Every young banker at 22 years old, for some reason, they're a vice president. If you've realized that, every mortgage broker is a vice president, and it's like, it's all just a show, right? But the younger bankers, they're the ones that are going to direct you and lead you to the senior underwriters. And underwriters are the actual ones who are the signal callers, etc. And so I was just on the phone recently and I said, listen, you're not going to know who the shot caller is, the boss is, so to speak, until you do your first loan with this bank. And then they're going to run you up all the way the gamut. And then finally, you're going to find out who the decision maker is. And from that decision maker, then you're going to look back on your profile and they're going to say, hey, you need 20 more points on your credit score. You need 2 months more of seasoning on this credit account. And then you're going to get your actual checklist, and then from there, you're going to go back in there with your checklist 2 or 3 months later, and you're going to demand your funding, and at that point, they're going to say, oh shit, this guy completed every single task that we told him to do. And they're going to have no choice. But by the way, they also want to give you that money. So when I walk into a bank, for example, nowadays, and this is just based on my experience, it's like a whole different experience. It's more like hey man, how can I make this happen? Like, how can I do this? I'm not walking in there like bombastic, like a jerk, like demanding, like, give me this, give me that. No, I treat people the way I want to be treated. Okay, how do I raise this 200K business lines of credit? How do I do this? How do I do that? Okay, well, you need to have 800K in gross income for that year. Well, I can put that together. I got rentals that are making 10, 15, 20K in gross income, and we can do some transactions, that kind of thing. And once you get that checklist, man, you walk in there demanding your financing and you're going to get it. The hard part isn't creating the money. This is what I say nowadays. The hard part isn't raising the money. The hard part is actually taking that money, those lines of credit, et cetera, that you used to then go try and buy assets with it and actually run a project. Now, my process for running projects, now looking back, right, because I did a lot of trial and error, but it's a mixture of how I bought my first property management business and also how I started in real estate, kind of both. I put those experiences into one package, basically. And so my experience when I first bought a business was I went out and found a partner, right? But the problem was I didn't have anything to bring to the table to that partner besides a smile and a promise I'm going to pay you and a promise I'm going to show up. That's all I had to offer at the time. Whereas with now, what I tell medical students, especially if you're in medical school, go out, start working on your credit, start working on manufactured spending, open up your LLC to start getting it aged and start learning how to manufacture spend. Get a business credit card, start paying your rent with it, start paying your phone bill with it, start paying any little bills that you can with it and pay it off. And then every 3 months, call that same bank up and say, hey, I need a higher credit limit. Hey, I need a higher credit limit. Hey, I need a higher credit limit. And then before you know it, you get 4 credit cards, 4 banks, et cetera. And you've been doing that for 6 to 12 months. You're going to get 50K, 75K, 100K, right? In credit limits because business credit, I mean, they're obscene. I have this form and it's actually a screenshot of a picture, but I went from a $3,000 credit limit with US Bank to $30,000 to $30,000.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's $30,000. That's a 3.5% FHA down payment,
Right.
Yeah. And that's 5% down on a $500,000 house plus some closing costs.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude. Now, so that's the first thing I tell people, like, hey, work on this manufactured spending process, et cetera, and learn that, get your LLC aged, et cetera. The second part to that is, dude, it's only 40 hours. Go get your real estate license. just take the classes and go get your real estate license. You're in a room 14, 15 hours a day anyway, because you're either stressed the heck out studying or you're just antisocial because medicine makes you antisocial, right? So just stay in there a couple hours, and it's like the 40-hour real estate class, you're in there for 10 hours. It's actual really 10 hours worth of work. And then the other 30 hours of it, you're just clicking, to refresh the screen, to put in your time,
Oh, for sure.
And yeah. And so go get your real estate license. So then all of a sudden you graduate medical school, you have 50 to 100K in business credit and credit lines. You have your real estate license. And then wherever they put you at in residency, you go out and you buy your first fourplex or your first single family. You can represent yourself as a buyer's agent, get 2.5% commission. Plus you can use your down payment, right, on a business credit, et cetera. And how you structure that is differently. And before you know it, man, you're on the gravy train. Now, if you really want to go crazy, the third part to this is, and I told my friends this, the third part is basically calling up a hard money lender in your area once you get there as a resident, and you're going to find out who the players are. You know what I mean by that?
Yep. Who's the big fish? Who's got the cash?
Yeah, and the hard money lenders, they're going to know who the guys are that are the real serious people. If you want to know who the real serious people are in terms of joint venture partners and business partners, et cetera, you want to call a bank or hard money lender because they're going to want to connect you with somebody to do a deal, a real serious person.
Yeah. Then you build out your team. You keep going from there. The cool thing, Benjamin, too, is that in residency, and I tell folks too all the time, you should be thinking about buying a home, buying a multifamily property, house hacking to your buddies that you're in residency with, because you all are never going to be home anyways, but you still need a place to stay. Then you're cash flowing on that deal, and you can just continue to stack, like you're saying. So that's really cool.
Yeah, man. The one thing too, and I was going to make a video on breaking down extenuating circumstances when it comes to FHA and conventional guidelines. Basically, you can move into, let's say, Portland, Oregon, right? And you can work at OHS and you can get a 0% down. You can get a FHA, 3.5% down, 5% down, whatever it is. But because of extenuating circumstances, if you have to move greater than 50 miles away, then you then qualify for another FHA or another conventional loan. And so there's ways that you can just start stacking properties. It's crazy, if you really start looking at the guidelines, et cetera. And as a resident, I'm just familiar with OHSU because that was the program that I wanted to apply to the most at the time when I was actually interested in residency and finishing on, I was determined to be a physician until I wasn't, if that makes sense. But it was like just reading through the fine print. Nobody wants to do the extra work. And so the reason why I say nowadays it feels like I'm in finance is because now I'm pulling up all the guidelines on mortgages and lending requirements and all these different things and working backwards. Okay, what does the bank want first before I go out and hit the pavement looking at deals? A lot of people, they say, go out and buy a rehab house, sober living, rehab houses, et cetera. It's great. But the problem with that is basically, essentially, they're still going to give you appraisals at market rent. So even though your house may rent to a rehab sober living for $8,000 or $9,000 a month, the problem with it is the appraisal is only going to be set at $4,000 or $5,000, let's say, because that's the market rent, right? So what ends up happening is you have to kind of layer it. You have to get third parties involved. You have to get business partners involved, and you just have to cooperate more so to make sure the structure's right. So you can please the bank, with their initial appraisal. So you can say, I'm just telling you in general, okay, these are topics. These are concepts. I'm not really doing them. You know what I mean? So anyway, you can go out and get a house. Let's say that's, $3,000 a month on market rent. And you can have a third party rent that house for $3,500 a month, right? The business partner, et cetera. And then you can use that $3,500 and they'll say, it's pretty close to market rent. It's not that much higher up. So we're going to go ahead and use that one, right? Remember what I told you guys about younger bankers that want to be future investment bankers. And when they take the Series 7, they're going to be these Mr. Investment bankers, They're the ones that are going to push these types of things through because it's a good, solid investment, We're not like, it's like, what's the value of a property? Is it the appraised value or is it the replacement value or is it whatever somebody's going to buy from it? At the end of the day, the bank has the appraisals, the bank has the information, and they make the call, if that makes sense. And so you can have a $3,500 rent on the first layer, and then the second layer, then that's when you can have your, actual lease to the, to the original party who wanted to do the deal and actually run the sober living, et cetera.
That's cool, man. Yeah, That's a unique way to stack things up to make it look more favorable for the bank who's ultimately making the decision. And I think you bring up a good point too of kind of having your financial house in order, like figuring out, hey, what does the bank need before I go out and find the deal? So you're not racing backwards trying to figure out like, hey, I found this great deal. Now I have to figure out how to fund it and down my due diligence time and all these other things. So yeah, that's important to think about going forward. What's something you're passionate about that you're working on right now?
Right now, honestly. So just going through the court process and the legal process and all the shit that I've had to deal with these last 6 months, I've been exposed to a lot more, I would say, government funded type of housing, like sober living, rehab housing, things of that nature. I've seen somebody, I shit you not, when they were in a secluded area on treatment, totally engaged, and then I saw the same person at a gas station, at the Arco gas station in North Plains, and it was like a night and day person. One person's in there with me talking about God and, the Bible and very active and very like one like this. And then the next minute, it's like talking to a ghost, I'm like, wow, there's a serious need for sober living. There's a serious need for people to get off the street and get in a house, get in a controlled environment. Not everybody can handle freedom, And so taking just, I would say, my passion for healthcare, so to speak, and just kind of redirecting it to real estate and finance and, also solving a big need. I would say that's more so of the area that I'm going in. But if you're talking like, what's my end goal in this? My end goal in this is to buy, God willing, 10, 15, 20 acres within the next 5 to 6 years, set up a place where people can go on Sabbath days and Saturdays and hang out and enjoy life, kind of live in an alternate reality for a little bit, and get out in the woods somewhere. And then, of course, just maintain rentals, do business deals. Eventually, what I want to do once this next phase, which is the real estate building wealth phase, the next 5 to 10 years for me. Then from that phase, I want to go on like a corporate run with my kids once they turn like 18 or 19 years old,
Nice. That's awesome,
That's kind
man.
of the general outlook.
Yeah, you got things figured out. That's cool. I'm sure, your kids are going to learn a lot from your creative mind, like your work ethic, figuring out business, all these sorts of things. And they're going to be off to the races for sure.
Oh yeah. And their mom's an extremely hard worker too.
Yeah.
So they're going to get it from both sides. She was like a softball athlete. She was very like successful in her own right. She became a nurse. She worked in the CVOR, got her like CVOR license or certificate or something like that. So they're going to get it from both sides. But I think for me, they're going to get more so the creative, ambitious side, like, hey, I can actually do all kinds of crazy stuff,
That's awesome.
Financially, and I could just dream a little bit,
Yeah. Dream, figure it out, think, not necessarily big picture, but get into the creative side of things to figure out, hey, how can I make this work instead of just like, oh, the bank said no, I'm just going to leave, and figure out, hey, well, how can I make my situation more favorable? How can I get this deal to go through, which is awesome, man. As we're getting closer.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Just really quickly, because I think this is going to benefit a lot of people. What I've realized too is you're not going to know unless you actually submit the paperwork and talk to an actual banker. You're not going to go until you have a property under contract. And so one thing that helps people, if you're like, hey man, how do I buy a property with no money? Contact a banker. They're going to they want to do loans, There's no doc, no income, bank statement types of loans. There are all types of different loan situations and scenarios. And so if you go out and you raise $300,000 worth of business credit, you're going to find somebody out there that's going to give you a loan on a $500,000 house. They're going to say, what? You want to put down $300,000 in business credit in cash? Okay, yeah, I'll carry that note, right?
Yeah. Are you working mostly with more like smaller local regional banks, or what would you look for in a bank when you're doing the strategy?
So this is what I've learned. Number one, if they're a new bank, like if they're a new bank in the area, or they just did a merger, like Rivermark Credit Union and another bank just did a merger, and I'm like drawn to that. Like that's, if they open up a new branch, and like I said, they're putting the young bankers over there, And so I would say if there's a new bank, if it's a new merger, those kinds of people. But also, talk to hard money lenders and private money lenders in your area. They're going to tell you, this bank sucks. This bank is great. This bank is awesome. Banner Bank's another bank that I've been doing some research on here locally. But if you talk to, again, I think this is I can tell you guys in 4 or 5 minutes. You guys want to know the perfect, I would say, in my opinion?
Yeah, let's
You're
hit
moving to a new area in medical school, right? And your new hobby now isn't playing video games or social media or Netflix. Your new hobby now is raising money for fun. Now, I don't want to get it out right now, but I have a baseball card case with like 60 credit cards in it, right? It's fun. It's fun. It's like, oh shoot, look at all it's like Pokemon, like playing Pokemon. And so you go to this new place, you go to this new area. The first people that you want to contact is hard money lenders. And you just want to tell them this. You want to say, hey man, I have $150,000 to invest. I want to partner with somebody who's experienced. And that hard money lender, it's very rarely they get a call like that, but they're very excited because what they want to do is they want to put you with somebody who's actually doing deals and producing deals. And so then from there, you just simply ask questions, humble yourself a little bit, shut up. Don't be like one of the medical students on rotations that want to tell the physicians about everything they've done in their lives, and you just sit there, humble yourself, just ask questions, be genuine. And then, let's say you find 15, 20 people that they give you names of, right? You're going to find at least one guy there that you get genuinely along with. And then you just kind of ride his coattail a little bit. And you're going to find out who all the players are, all the investment strategies, etc. Now, what I did, and I did this even recently, so this is why I'm telling you guys, this lesson is still in my mind. Basically, what I did was I was like, shoot, I'm going through a divorce, all this situation. I can't buy anything because asset restraining order, can't move debt. So I'm just kind of sitting here like this, And I said, well, I can build my Rolodex. I can go out and find partners. And a lot of men resonate with being divorced and going through that divorce. So they're like, oh man, I went through that. Yeah, I'm here to support you, brother. All these kinds of things, And so anyway, you ride this guy's coattail. Now, what you don't want to do is bring your ideas to the table. That's not this time. That's not the time to do it. So if you find somebody that you genuinely get along with, and this person has been successful in apartment buildings since 1994, don't go over there and be like, well, I want to go ahead and I really want to do a short-term rental. That's my big grand idea. Or, hey, I want to open up a coffee shop and I want to partner with you to open up a coffee shop. No, you're in the apartment business now until you get, really successful. And then from there, then you can start hitting your dreams in a sense. So that would probably be one of the easiest ways, like what do you call it? A shortcut to success?
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that make logical sense to you?
No. Yeah, absolutely. And it all kind of boils down to one, kind of putting yourself out there and being willing to make a phone call or a couple phone calls to the bankers, to the hard money lenders. They might be uncomfortable, but also building those relationships. I mean, real estate is a relationships game, no matter how you look at it. So absolutely, man. That's awesome. Well, if folks want to know more.
It gets on. Let me tell you guys this though, because before you even get to that point, we're like, let me pick up the phone and all this kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Dude, I can't tell you how desperate I had to be to pick up that phone and how you're like this. I remember when I was in my 1-bedroom, 1-bath apartment where I was like, holy crap, I was inundated with all this information about business credit and all that stuff. And I was really desperate. But then when it came to picking up this phone and start making shit happen, it got really really like this. And so that's normal. That's very, very normal. So just so you guys know that before you do what I just told you and play it back 5-10 times, just know that when you look at that phone, you're going to be like this.
Yeah. It's about to get real.
It's about to get real. And that's a good thing.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, sometimes, that moment when you're getting called to action, you can either step into that or you can run away. And that call to adventure, that call to action, it's important to answer the call and get after it. So super cool, man. Ben, I know you have some ways that folks can reach out to you if they want to know more, they want to learn about what you're doing. What are some good ways folks can reach out to you if they want to learn more?
The best way to reach out to me, honestly, right now is either through my website, benjaminmaciel.com, or on Instagram, benjaminmaciel_MD. Those are the best ways to reach out to me. Now, if you guys have like basic, simple questions where you just want to talk and text, I'm working on something right now where it's like $37 a month and it's unlimited talking. It's unlimited texting to get your first deal. But if you want like one-on-one talking and Zoom, stuff like that, it's like, okay, we'll set up a call. We'll do $250. I'll walk you through raising your first 100 credit. And then we can talk and text, or we can text the rest of the way until you get that first, I would say, deal done. But my long game in this is actually to start raising up, 10, 15, 20 MDs where we get partners and we can start bouncing credit, bouncing deals, start moving, start making transactions, et cetera, maybe buy a hospital in the future. So it's a long game,
That's awesome, man. Go back by the hospital that you were in where you were like, hey, this is where the money is, where the anesthesiologist was. So maybe take it full circle. That's awesome, man.
Sure.
Well, Benjamin, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for coming on the Physicians and Properties podcast. I definitely learned a lot. Going to be reaching out to you, learn more about this strategy because it's not something that I've heard or been familiar with. So really cool.
Yeah, man, a lot of prayer, a lot of fasting these last 6 months and a lot of reflection just kind of to put together things, and I feel like it's all coming full circle in a sense where now it's like a matter of time before I can kind of get off the leash and so to speak and start hitting it. But I can't tell you guys enough that healthy physicians are not only healthy physically, but also in other areas of life. And don't discount what creativity and life outside of medicine does. That was my outlet. When I was sitting there in my 1-bedroom apartment, like this was the creative outlet that I needed. That was productive. It wasn't just sitting there sketching, drawing pictures. It was like creating money, going out and buying real estate and meeting new people. And I just want to tell you, man, this is probably one of the most coolest podcasts that I've been a part of. I appreciate you letting me just take the time to talk and kind of explain little different details. And we definitely got to do this again. We definitely got to do it again.
Absolutely, man. Yeah. Well, hey, thanks for reaching out. Thanks for coming on the podcast. And I'm excited to see where things go next, man. You're moving fast. So good luck with everything coming up. If I can help out in any way, just let me know.
100%. Bless you guys. Thank you guys for watching.
Awesome, man. Thanks for your time. Have a good night. Hey, real quick, if you're still listening to this, I'm assuming you got value from it. So I need your help specifically. My 2-year vision with this podcast is to help 100,000 physicians learn how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want. There are 2 main ways that a podcast grows. One is through ratings and reviews, and the other is word of mouth. If you can please leave me a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as send this to 1 to 2 friends that you think would get value from it, we can reach the physicians that we want to reach. Thanks in advance, and talk to you on the next episode. Please note that the information shared on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial, medical advice. The views expressed on this podcast are those of the host and the guest and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Defense or the United States Air Force.